Blessings. I thought I would share a few thoughts in the context of A Course in Miracles, but in the context of truth, about the devil. The devil is referred to a little bit in A Course in Miracles, but in a very different way and via a very different contextual understanding than really any other medium, which either wholly dismisses or wholly acknowledges or whatever. So I thought I would share a little bit about the devil, and in reference to ACiM. So, I mean, of course, what are we talking about? What is the devil? Who is this devil dude? So what are we referring to? And of course, the obvious is a very literal being, a very literal omega point, if you like, the opposite or the antithesis of God, the Antichrist, the Antichristed or the unchrusted, perhaps dechrusted, the will unto itself, the aspect of God that rejected God, forsaking God for itself and for its ilk of its own kin and kind as it perceived it. And that was really the origins of the devil. Of whatever way, if you buy into any part of that story, really they are just the simple mechanics of the truth of that, that an aspect of God effectively turned on itself and turned on its whole, choosing to become self-author rather than acknowledging what it perceived as an external author, or in this sense an external will. And so the will of the piece, seeing itself as a piece of God and not itself as God, but now as a piece, a component of God, as separate to the whole, would say, I would choose to self-rule and rule my own part in awareness of God, but apart from. And that decision is rife with danger, for we see the fruits of that fundamental choice and the mechanics of the way that works. For again, no matter really what religious or spiritual reference you would draw on, we all tend to originate from a source or from source. Most people will accredit that source to be God, whatever God happens to mean. And so we are all from the one point, and we are all the one point, meaning that whether we are there now, like from the one point means at one point we were one point, which means we were not you and me, and we may or may not even be an us, or even a we. We may just be a collective I. Who knows? But really, when you think about it, critically, historically, when you sense it intuitively, we really do all go back to the one point of source, of creation and of the grand creator. And that one point is not 2 points. And you really need to think about that. A point of singularity in the mind of God is not 2 points, and it is not multiples, it is not fractals, it does not have aspects, it is one. And so for you and I to be from and of the one, and to still be one now, is in relation to our source in present time in the state of God, and not in a state of separation from God. For when we become self-authors, and we become, as we perceive ourselves, separate from God, perhaps a part of God, but a part is still a separation statement. When you see yourself as independent from or individuated from God in any way, shape or form, even very mildly, even a very palatable way, all the way down to utter disdain and contempt and great dismissal of God, even to dismiss God's very presence and existence as a whole. All of those forms of disassociation enable you to generate a chasm between yourself and God, and create an island of yourself unto yourself. And here we are, a world full of 7.5 billion islands, operating according to no divine will, no internal guidance that is the same as their brother and sister, wondering how on earth they're going to get through their life, how on earth they're going to deal with whatever, how on earth, and so forth. All of which implying that the individual is responsible for the lot. The individual is their own ship, cast adrift onto the sea of the world and of life, and the best that it can hope for is to find other ships for balm and salvation, perhaps collaboration, perhaps seeking guidance, whatever. All of those things, though, still underlie the premise that we are alone and we are separate from each other. Even if we are all friends, even if we all love each other, that is still formed upon a basis of separation. And so separation, as I'm describing it now, is not really related to only the people or the things or situations that you don't like, where you might say, that is not of my creation or choice or liking. I dismiss it. I don't want it. It's not of me. It's not natural to me. It is something different. So you have an opinion about it in the negative. And so it is negative. That thing, that person, place, situation, event, whatever, is negative. We don't like it. It could equally be the other way, however. It could be a person, place, situation, or thing that you do like, that you prefer. The one thing that we don't realise when navigating the world in this way, which is really a navigation state of polarities where we are simply oscillating between preferences, what we do like and what we don't like, and avoiding what we don't like and magnetising to what we do like. It's still oriented all around the same thing and around these poles. It's a very interesting way to navigate life, and a very tiring way to navigate life. You cannot keep it up forever, because you realise that at some point one of them really isn't manageable anymore. You really can't just continue on in that state of oscillation. And so something has to give and something has to change. A Course in Miracles will talk about our self-definition and the way that, I guess even in a textbook and religious and intuitive way, the devil has been formed and shaped as a form of self-will and self-authorship. A Course in Miracles quite clearly states and demonstrates that from the core truth, which we just don't bring them together because one will neutralise the other thought, from your core truth, which you acknowledged is a point of singularity and a point of centrality, which in itself is universal and eternal, it is a state of one, that anything other than that one is something else. Anything other than the oneness, which is truth, which is God, creation and creator as one, anything other than a holy experience of that is something else. And the only way you can have something other than God is because you made it up. There is really only God and you. And by you, I mean the you as the sum of your experience that is not of God. Now think about this. What does that mean? What of you and what in your life and what in the world is not of God? If all things are of God and all things are God, what is not of God? That is a very appropriate question to ask. For in truth, all things are of God. But what does God mean? Think about it. For if you do, you will very quickly perceive a discrepancy in what you know the conditions of God to mean, and what that would look like, what that experience would be like, and the conditions of the world as you know it and see it and experience it today. You would not call our world heaven. Some would say our world is in sharp and immediate contrast to heaven. And A Course in Miracles would agree with that statement in that miracle states there is only heaven, there is only God, and only the state of God. To perceive anything other than that is a creation that is within your will to create, but it does not make it true. It is likened exactly to a dream or a daydream specifically, where you are manifesting an entire reality in your mind that you are participating in, almost as a sensory truth that is in no way the truth of what is actually happening. It is within your creative capacity as a creator, like God, to create what thou will. And so you may create something unlike your creator because it is within your ability to do so. You may create something untrue because you can, and you may call it true because as you create it, it will be true for you. This is the world that we see. For the world that we see and the world that we know does not reflect the conditions of God and the conditions of heaven. There is not an eternal presence within this state. Within our world, everything dies, everything changes, everything is born and lives and dies and decays. That is not a part of God. Sickness, illness, that is not a part of God. For those things are change, and those things are temporary. They represent death, and none of those things are a part of God. None of those things reflect a state of singularity. So we truly are talking anything other than the purest point of singularity. Anything other than that is an experience more likened to an experience of godlessness or a lack of presence of God in what you're thinking about. That's a very sharp way to reassess some of your thinking, and certainly your very physical world and physical life in your own life. How unified is your internal and external experience? How unified is your internal experience with all of the facets of it, and then your external with its facets, and so forth and so forth. It gets very complicated, and complication is not a quality of God, for complication is not peaceful. All of this is the baseline for our reality that we have created for ourselves, consensually and collaboratively. It's like a collaborative, consensual daydream of an experience that is unlike heaven, that is unlike God, that all of us in this world agree to experience as a form of truth. And what I am referring to are the worst parts of our world. I'm referring to the horrors of war. I'm referring to the things that happen to people, to women, to children, to men, to everybody. I'm referring to the worst inclinations of man, the worst behaviours of man, all of it, the darkest, sickest, most horrific parts of humanity that you can think of. We know this is not of God, and that is why we attribute it to another. That is why, individually, in its parts as well as collectively, the darkness has a name. And we have named it the devil. What does the devil look like? Really, the devil is an over-assertion of free will. The devil, at its core, says, I'll do what I want. Thank you. And so it does. And so it is will that moves it forward, and its will in its mind is unquestioned. But it is not the will here that is the issue. It is the consequences. It is the awareness of itself in relationship and connection to all things, not realizing the destruction and damage that it is causing, not realizing, not aware that its external world is an expression of its internal experience, and now its external world is self-destructing, for its internal world is self-destructing, for it is celebrating and wholly cut off now from God, and reveling and fully engaged wholly in that of itself which it perceives and understands to be godless. That is the devil. And the devil lives within us individually, in your thoughts, your feelings, your deeds, your values, your lack of values, the traumas and the poisons and the bullshit and the ill will and the hatred and the anger and the spite and the revenge and the points keeping and all of that stuff, the thievery, the deception, the bullying, the sick thoughts, all of that, any part of that. If I were to ask you any part of that, which whether they are a part of you or not, are a part of individual human beings. Every individual will have some sliver or shadow in that form, some darkness in that form, and we know it. If I were to ask you, is that of the wholeness of God? You know the answer, it is not. You know that the truth is that that is not of God. So what is not of God? Everything is of God, except for that which we believe is not of God, except for that which we created, and that in its son is the devil, and that is the devil in you. It is the part of you that believes it is separate from God. And that part is you. It is the I that you refer to as yourself. It is me. It is the I. That part is the devil. On a collective level as well, that is the devil. It is the same. The devil is the shadow, individually and collectively, in ourselves, our immediate and larger world. It is the part of us that is not of God, the part of us that feels away from and separated from God, unseen by God and or judged by God equally. It is the godless terrain that we created, that we made up. For we are not looking at God, and God is not invited into every corner of our hearts and of our world where that could not